You're listening to Comic Reflections, episode 27. I'm Nicholas Prom.
And I'm Jeff Barnhart.
Cool. So, Jeff, what did we want to talk about today? Silver Age stuff?
Silver Age stuff. I
Okay.
think it's the golden age for me. Although the real golden age of comics is 8. I love that quote.
Oh, that's great. Who's that from?
I have no idea. Silver Age, the epiphany of it, well, not the epiphany, the epitome of it is Jimmy Olsen's, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. And the thing is, I want to live in a world where Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen comic is a popular comic. And it was hugely popular. And why? But it's for people who don't know, it is utterly bizarre stuff that happens to Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen's turned into Turtle Boy. He's turned into a woman. He marries an ape. He
was Hitler's astrologer in one story. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. And they're just really bonkers stories. It's like, why does this happen to just someone who was a friend of Superman's just stumbles into all this?
And who's reading a book about somebody's pal? We don't...
Lois Lane had her own book, too. What?
Who?
Lois Lane had her own book.
And those are fun too.
Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, like that was the book.
Yeah, I guess you could do a Robin and you could do a Tonto. I'm trying to think of other friends.
It's so funny though because Robin never had his own book until the 80s, I don't think. Late 80s.
Mm-hmm. Bucky did not have his own book.
Robin had some solo backup stories, and then. He was in the Teen Titans, the original Teen Titans. But yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very true. Captain America sidekick Bucky. No solo stories.
Yeah.
Well, not until years later when he became, the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, none of those. Let's not even go into the Green Lantern racist sidekick thing.
You mean Pieface?
Yeah.
Some of those racist sidekicks are kind of fun. I mean, they're bad, but they do kind of say something about the time, The Blackhawks, the fighter pilot squadron, they had Chop Chop, the Chinese cook. That was probably the worst. I mean, the Spirit had Ebony White, the little cabbie.
Yeah, it's embarrassing, but there's no nicer guy than Eisner, and
right. And Ebony was always a very sympathetic character. He was never played just for laughs. He was always resourceful and helpful to the Spirit in those stories.
With an unfortunate grammar, I guess.
Well, right. And his appearance was definitely a caricature. But I think they played him up in as much positive light as you possibly could. He was definitely a stronger and more interesting character than Chop Chop or Pieface. So, for what that's worth.
Yeah, that's because it's Eisner. Too bad Eisner didn't get a good movie. Man.
Oh, The Spirit, great looking movie. Just put it on mute.
Right.
It's terrible. Yeah.
Samuel L. Jackson, where have you gone?
Well, it was ridiculous because the octopus, what a tangent we got onto, but the Spirit movie, the octopus, you never saw him in the comics other than wearing a disguise or just the gloved hands. And in this, he's just all out this megalomaniacal villain, way over the top. I think the other flaws in the film could have been forgiven, but that one was so just not right.
Yeah. And that's Golden Age or Silver Age, right?
Yeah.
Started in the 40s. And before World War II, right?
I think during the war years is when the Spirit came around. I think he came around in like 1940 or 41, so I'm a little fuzzy on the very beginnings. But the funny thing about the Spirit was he wasn't in a regular comic. He was in the Spirit section in that was a supplement in people's newspapers every Sunday. So it was like a comic section that was printed and put out, and it was the Spirit and a couple of other stories. And then, of course, reprinted and collected here and there in comic book form. But yeah, a really neat idea that I wish, boy, that would be a great thing to revitalize the industry now, to see those a supplement like that. But I think with newspapers going away, it's a moot point.
Everything's going away.
Print media.
Comic books are going away. I don't know if they're going to... Hopefully they'll be reborn online, but it will never be the same. And
Yeah.
I'm not being Cassandra or Jeremiah, but it's just the way it's going. And
I can
I,
s- I can see issue to issue going digital. I think people
mhm,
will always want to have. There'll always be people who want to have, the hold it in your hand comics. I think the
mhm.
trade paperback format will stick around.
Yeah, and I love trade paperbacks.
Oh, I
Um,
love them too.
I was listening to your 20 and 21, and I was getting lost talking. And when you're talking about the what's going on, it says, I don't know these characters. I have no idea what's going on, and it's been a while since I've been in the comics.
Sure.
In a lot of ways, I'm the worst person having as a guest because I haven't walked into a comic book store in about 15 years, and I was thinking to myself, why? And one thing, I used to work near a comic book store, had an hour for lunch, go in the comic book store, buy some comics, gab with the comic book guy, who's a lot nicer than the Simpsons one. And
Let's hope so.
but it's the complex continuity of getting this stuff. And I think it's and I've looked at some modern comics, and man, what happened before and all this stuff. Man, do I have to read 50 issues to get into this?
Yeah.
And and I probably could, but man, it's a barrier for new readers. And
It can be daunting, but I am one of those guys like when I was a kid, the late '80s was when I started reading comic books. Um, sure, most of the comic books I got was like I would not be getting lots of stuff in sequence, and most of them were Marvel books, which were usually not one and done stories.
mm-hmm,
Standalone stuff was usually very serialized.
mm-hmm,
So I would just kind of have to piece together what had happened with, the information presented to me, and it was fine. I was in love with comics, regardless. Would I have loved to have read the things, the
mm-hmm,
previous issues and the ones that followed? Absolutely. But it didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the medium. It didn't make me not want to read comics. It wasn't discouraging in that sense. It was just, man, I wish I had an allowance like other kids.
right. Yeah, but you can see why somebody would be off put by that. And I
Sure.
see that myself. And how do you know which comics are good? I mean, how what do
You,
you go
you,
in the line and you read someone who likes this or that, and then
well,
and
sometimes
then
it's a bit of you have to have some
right,
experimentation. I
mm-hmm,
mean, even I recently had to close my box because I just um, uh, wasn't working enough to keep up with all the other
mm-hmm,
things in life and comics. But sure, there were some things that I took chances on to just
mm-hmm,
check out, and they didn't suit my taste, and I didn't keep continuing picking up those books. But um, I ended up finding out that by and large there was more things that I was trying that I was enjoying than not. So
mm-hmm,
overall, I think comics are a pretty safe bet to jump in
yeah.
wherever and whatever.
Unfortunately, what are they, $3, $4 now?
Um, yeah, yeah, 3 or 4
That's a
depending.
chunk of change. I don't know what is 12 cents in 2013 money back in 1965 or whatever.
You know,
Is it the same? I don't know.
I think it'd be a bit more because the paper has changed too.
I'm talking about as in
As
for
far as like,
young Billy with his allowance. Is 12 cents
well,
to young
right. I
Billy in
mean,
1965 the same as
well, if a
$4 today?
kid is going to go to a comic shop with their allowance, they're probably going to get one a week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know what a kid's allowance is. I mean, when I
Uh,
when I was young, kids got $5. Other kids.
mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know. And also, you have to really remember that kids aren't who are reading comic books these days. It's more kids. People get into comic books later. It's
Mm-hmm.
usually in the teens or
I
20s.
guess that's when I
You
got
know,
into it. I mean, although.
because it's again the marketplace is where do you find comic books? Bookstores have trade paperbacks,
Mm-hmm.
but in single issues, it's comic shops exclusively now, for the
Yeah,
most
a
part.
little bit in Freddy's, but not much.
Not much. I mean, when I was a kid, they had racks and racks of
Mm-hmm.
comics, and it was great. Um, as popular as all the superhero movies are in, I don't know why there isn't a comic book rack as an end case on the end of toy aisles because I'm sure you would get some crossover
Yeah.
sales that
Or
way.
why don't you sell a toy with the comic book with it.
And they've done that. That
yeah.
happens, but
I haven't seen it very often.
It's kind of an experiment, but I wish that was you saw that constantly.
Mm-hmm.
But even if a kid gets a comic book that comes free with their toy, they still don't know where to go and get comic books on a regular basis. It's not in the mom and pop corner drugstore, anymore. It's a different marketplace now, and so it's definitely a higher age for intro to the medium.
Although people of all ages have always read comics. I mean,
well, sure,
so comics went with the soldiers in World War II.
Absolutely, it was an adult audience first. Almost. It didn't become quote unquote kids stuff until the 50s witch hunts kind of came in, but
which brings us back to the Silver Age.
Which brings us back to the Silver Age. Let's go back to the.
I was looking at the site. I Love You, But You're Strange, about weird comic books, and and one of the things, and one of the comments were that looking at Jimmy Olsen comic, you look at it and it says, what in the world happened here and what's going to happen? And a lot of the comics today is mainly a really good picture of the hero or something. There's nothing, I really want to read what happens here, but it's just, wow, that's really great. Someone did a good drawing of something. And I want to know why Jimmy Olsen is Porcupine Boy, and I want to know why he's making Superman cry or something like that.
Yeah.
And the story. We went to, I don't know when this was, late 80s.
I gotta say, I do have to disagree. There's a lot of great comic books out now, and I love following the story.
I'm talking about the covers.
Oh, the covers.
The covers drawing you in.
Oh, okay.
I want to see what's going on in this comic book, and a lot of the comic books just look pretty on the outside. It's
right,
really dramatic. But
in the Silver Age, you had dialogue on a lot of those covers, like. Right. So I get what you're talking about now.
Okay. So we went to my friends and I went to Hate Ball, which is Dan Close and Peter Bagg. And Dan Close of 8 Ball Comics, he did Ghost World.
Oh, sure.
And
Peter Bagg from
Hate Magazine.
Hate Comics. That's a great comic.
I love it. And I normally do not like non-superhero comics, but I like them. And Dan Close is great. It's not my cup of tea, but he's really good. But so we met them, and these gods of alternative comics and underground comics, rather, and they look like grad school students. And
of course.
I don't know. I was kind of, what was I thinking? They're not going to be Olympians. They're going to be
well, sure,
regular Joes. But I was surprised myself for being surprised. So they're real nice too. And,
sure.
But my buddy who's far more into comics than I was talking to Dan Close, and he's talking about Jimmy Olsen, and he was talking, and he said, and Dan Close, where'd you get all these copies? I can't find them anymore. And apparently Julius Schwartz would have an idea.
Julius Schwartz, who was the editor-in-chief at DC Comics for many years. So
okay, thank you. He would have a cover. Here is Jimmy Olsen as Turtle Boy. Here you go. Write a story around it. And that is why they're so convoluted and weird. And
but it's not so convoluted as to say continuity heavy, but they're so like, here's a bizarre concept.
Yeah.
And just go.
Right. And it's.
You remember that story where the Flash became overweight?
Ah.
He was and he was like the fattest Flash or something like that.
I like Marvel and all that stuff, but the heaviness of Marvel and poor Aunt May being sick all the time, and Spider-Man's always sad and he's always owing money. It's just so nice that exists this world where goofy things happen and people are having a good time, and bad things happen but they get resolved, and
sure,
it's just it's like a place that's away from the world, and we have you don't have that many places that you can go and the world will not intrude.
Sure.
I'm not saying that every place ought to be that, but I think there ought to be some places
Yeah.
where we don't have to worry about politics or current events or something, or the latest fad or something like that. Just something, entertainment. And which is more revolutionary now than it was then, because it's not happening here.
And it's interesting to look at DC and Marvel back in the Silver Age, and that especially in the '60s, where you kind of got to have both sides of that, and both are having this great period of creativity and really great comics, but both playing in these worlds of superheroes, but doing very different things with them. Marvel being very topical and into continuity, and this is what happens here is going to affect what happens later. That's cool. Where DC was more the legend builders, like here's a story and here's a story, and just like layers in this different way, like a web of just like exciting things. And DC would do a lot of they would get out of the continuity thing by doing an imaginary story. Like, what if...
Which is the funniest thing
What
ever.
if, Lex Luthor was Superman and Clark Kent was a gangster? I mean, I read this story recently, and it's...
they're so fun.
They are. Loads of fun. I love the both of them. I was totally a Marvel kid growing up, which is funny because for a kid who... can't get lots of comics all the time, DC is your best bet. I think you get more, at least back then, you get more standalone stories per issue. But I love the bizarre, zany fun of DC Comics, and the crisp, exciting, down to earth. Down to earth heroes with problems that Marvel would do, and put them in these really exciting situations too. Lots of battles, lots of supervillains. I think DC had far fewer hero meets villain and fights kind of concept stories. They were more gimmicky.
Yeah, and more goofball things. Yeah, and like finding a magic something or another. And something happening and turning somebody, giving Lois Lane a mustache and stuff like that. I thought there was a villain in that
There was a story called Lois Lane, Hag.
Yes.
Do you remember that one?
Right. Yeah.
Or Lois Lane, the fattest woman in Metropolis. That happened too.
Yeah. I would say that I prefer DC. The DC, I despise these wars, DC, Marvel. I mean, you can like both and prefer one. It's not like
I
Marvel
love both.
Is awful. No, I enjoy Marvel too, and I just love the goofiness of the DC Silver Age better. But and people, I like chocolate and vanilla, so when I go to the Chinese buffet, I get both.
Exactly.
What's the
I find the people who are like the Marvel only guys to be very obnoxious and annoying, and they're usually really into comics of maybe the last decade or the last 5 years, and whatever. They're just kind of not the kind of people I like to talk to, because I think there's excitement in both camps, and there's great stuff. I definitely lean on DC more as I've gotten older. In fact, when people come to see me to recommend some comics, like to go and read in trade, it's almost always DC.
Which era? More recent or?
A little more recent. The 80s and 90s, like some key stories. I always say, check out Kingdom Come, Watchmen, Crisis on Infinite Earths, things like that. So, I mean, I think probably my top 5 graphic novels are probably all DC, I mean, Batman, The Dark Knight Returns. I mean, just Marvel got serious sooner, but then DC, once they caught up, they really did something with more substance with that, Marvel was more soap opera-y, with the constant things and very interpersonal things with all the heroes, especially Peter Parker, and the various members of the Avengers or the Fantastic Four. But when it got to talking about things with stakes and making a statement, DC, I think, just did a better job. And I think that started back when Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil did the Green Lantern, Green Arrow, hard traveling heroes story arc in the early '70s. It was so groundbreaking.
Yeah, really. I've always heard. I think I only read one or two, but the critics were bad against it. But just because something it didn't work, but that doesn't mean it can't evolve into something else. And it's interesting that was the catalyst of that.
Yeah.
To use a $5 word.
The impetus. That's another one. But what's another synonym?
Yeah. That'll be another podcast. Yeah, it's odd that comic books are dying out because at their apogee of cultural significance.
Well, right. It's like, why? Because, I mean, let's go back to when you were a kid. Maybe some people liked Zorro or the Davy Crockett movies, but they weren't going to go back and go read books about them.
They would read books, but they're not going to read a comic book. They maybe work. I'm just sure they were comic books. Disney didn't.
Actually, Disney licensed most of that stuff to Dell, and they did actually Zorro and Davy Crockett comics. Yeah. Unfortunately, Dell comics weren't very good. Dell Gold Key, the name changed at one point, but they had a few original things that were cool though.
Yeah. Both of those
that weren't licensed
shows
properties.
Are really just westerns.
Yeah,
because they're using and that's another thing. Westerns were popular because you could do anything with them because no one really cared. The ranchers don't care what you do. The evil ranchers. Real ranchers are not going to get angry about it, and the sheep herders are not going to get angry about it. So you could this blank slate you can put your morality story on and have fun with. And
just like those Superman stories that you're talking about, it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah,
because there are no. It's enough of an island kind of setting. Oh, in the Old West and whatever. There's no anything. The Indian. You could have an Indian friend, but all the other ones are bad guys, which is awful. But
Yeah.
Now
I can to segue someone else. Past 1940, most of the movies with Indians as the enemies usually gave them a fair shake. At least John Ford did, and the movies.
John Ford was a great filmmaker,
and he was one of the first. I'm not sure he's the first to use real American Indians, but he definitely used a lot of them, and the American Indian tribes loved him.
Maybe John Ford felt that he wanted to have a genuine quality to his movies, and also give them be a little more historically correct or something.
Right. And like Fort Apache, the Apaches are the enemy, but they have their point of view, and it's understandable. And actually, even I guess the villain of the story is Henry Fonda, and he appreciates their side.
Yeah.
But not enough.
Yeah. I think we've kind of got on down a rabbit trail here with the movies, but this is good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So the comic books, movies are everything, but now and it's just ironic that they're so huge. They're America's only common culture now. Everybody knows how Batman and Superman got started. They all know the origin stories.
These are the American myth. But it's interesting that the way that they are appreciated is through the medium of film more than comic books.
Just a time where they were able to. This time in history is the first time we were able to make a Hollywood superhero film with CGI and all that.
Well, yeah.
I mean and then comics start dying. I don't think it's
I think it's the technology, like print in general is going away.
right.
And
Yeah.
there are so many other things
Mm-hmm.
too. Like when you were a kid, okay, you've got television that's on till about 10 o'clock,
Mm-hmm.
Radio, and books,
Mm-hmm.
magazines, comics. The media, there are so many more uh, different outlets, especially with the advent of the internet,
Mm-hmm.
that I think fandom of all shapes and colors is more spread out also.
Yeah.
I think that people who enjoy comic books will enjoy them maybe more than ever, but it's just the market and the
The
amount
amount of
the
people
people.
who are buying comic books is getting smaller and
Yeah,
smaller, and
but who
it's
knows?
not
I
rep.
mean, maybe there's certainly people that I know at this college that that are new comic book readers and really
Mm-hmm.
excited about that. So I don't think that you know uh, the last nails in the coffin yet um, for the medium. I think that who knows, it could bounce back and just maybe in a different uh, format, maybe not print. But, yeah.
Um,
So
yeah, I don't know. It's just ironic. One of my friends was talking to somebody. He said he loved the old Batman series in the '60s,
yeah,
and the guy said, "Well, the comic books really didn't sell well during that time." And my smart aleck friend said, "That's because everybody realized how stupid they were." but it's but
it's funny.
I think that's
Detective
funny.
Comics was almost canceled just prior to that because yeah, it wasn't a very good book during the 60s.
Yeah,
I find I prefer Batman getting exciting at the end of the 60s for reading.
actually, yeah. I mean, the Silver Age
And
Batman, unless he's with Superman, I really don't particularly like. And I don't
uh,
know when Bat might happen, but I don't like it. But
yeah,
uh,
Batman I think is a
Bat might or
Batmite is a 50s early 60s kind of
yeah.
thing.
So,
Yeah, but except that you like Mr. Mixix
yeah, I don't.
who is totally the same.
Is it?
Well, not really. I mean, Mixix was kind of he wanted to trick Bat or Superman
Mm-hmm.
and menace him, and Batmite was a hero worship. So they kind of changed that a little
Okay,
bit. But
it's
it's another
not.
little pixie. It's a the Great Gazoo,
Mm-hmm.
in the comics.
Yeah. I'm being unfair. I've not read a Batmite comic book, but I saw him in this instantly hated it. So,
Yeah.
but maybe that's it. But
No, I don't think you're being unfair. Batmite's pretty lame.
yeah, I love me some Mixes Pedalic and Bizarro and
Bizarro is fun. I mean, and going to Bizarro World, those stories are
mm,
really weird.
yeah,
Anything that was perfect, you couldn't have anything perfect on Bizarro World because that
mm,
was a crime.
right.
Yeah, they had all these weird laws, and everyone on Bizarro World, for the most part, was clone of the original Bizarro and Bizarro Lois.
Hmm.
They almost all looked the same, and so remember they each had a medallion: Bizarro
Yeah.
#1
Hmm.
and Bizarro Lois #1.
Ugly and Beauty or something like that. The laws and
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Um. uh, oh, the reason I was talking about the Dan Close hate button. One of the things he
Wow. Jumping tracks really
yeah,
quick.
jumping tracks are that's how I roll.
It's okay. I do it too.
uh, but he was Dan Close was in college in a comic book class, and they're talking about all these alternative underground comics, how great they were, and Dan Close, who always has an LL character in his
Oh, like
this
in the Superman
right,
stories.
Lana,
Let's do it. Lana Lang, Lori Lamaris, Lex Luthor,
Lois Lane.
Lois Lane. I feel like there's another one,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But he said, well, look at these Jimmy Olsens. They're doing some crazy stuff here, and it's sometimes it's more um, out there to be square than to be just out there. It's harder to
I
Superman's a
think Huey
square
Lewis
guy.
said it best. It's
Yeah,
hip to be a square.
yeah.
So
It's for such a square person, Superman. He's and it kind of I don't I don't know how to explain it, but he's a Boy Scout, and everyone makes fun of him for being a Boy Scout, but he kind of makes him interesting as because he's a Boy Scout in a non-Boy Scout world, and everyone
Yeah.
else is crazy and how do you? And it makes him a more interesting character.
Well, right. And I think, especially if you're going to look at a comic book world, and people complain about the Superman being the Boy Scout or Superman being too powerful or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, you know what? You got to have some character that's like that to balance out. Like, you know what? They can't all be dark like Batman, or
Mm-hmm.
there's darker characters, but that's one character that lives in this world, and it's important that he is a part of it. It would be kind of lame. It would be missing an important component without Superman. So I like Superman just the way he is. The Boy Scout stays.
Yeah.
The kid stays in the picture.
Yeah. Oh, I hope the new movie's going to be good.
I hope so too. I mean, it looks pretty interesting, but can we make a movie with somebody other than the Phantom Zone criminals? It is time for Brainiac to be in a Superman movie. Far too long have we waited.
Oh, and the last one, man. What a waste of a good Lex Luthor and a waste
Oh, absolutely.
of
That movie is a waste. The costume looked better than ever.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Lois Lane should have been the henchwoman, and the henchwoman should have been Lois Lane.
Oh, the casting was wrong?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll buy that. But yeah, Superman Returns was a stinker.
Mm.
Yeah.
Man, how can you spend so much money and make a bad... I don't understand.
Because, I don't know, I think it's the wrong kind of studio involvement. They're like, either they're too hands-on, or they're green-lighting a picture without really good creative people. They're like somebody who doesn't have a cool story to tell. If you say, we're going to make a new Superman picture, you write a script, rather than somebody's like, oh, I've got this great idea for a Superman movie. Look at the Batman movies, the Christopher Nolan movies. That's someone with a vision.
Right.
And those are some of the best movies of all time. But Superman movies in particular, boy, by number 3, they were really just gone. I mean, the original series from the 70s and 80s.
The first one was good. The second one was better. And the third one was enjoyable but bad. The fourth one, I couldn't sit through it. So.
See, 3 and 4 are kind of like, wow, they both have moments of like, man, this is cool. I would love this to be a part of a much better movie,
right.
With Superman. But yeah, that's the ratio of quality to crap in those last 2 movies is unfortunately sways in the wrong direction.
The studios just have all these bright people who think they know better than everything else, and you'll see them when they make a movie out of a classic literature, or I guess Superman's classic literature by any definition.
But by and large, I think the DC movies the movies based on DC comics are more kind of strikeouts. They're like, well, they're okay at best, most of them.
Yeah.
And then the Marvel ones are like, wow, mostly great. Mostly really enjoyable. Like, whatever they're doing at Marvel Studios, they're doing it right.
The first Hulk was bad, but
the second Hulk was great.
I have not seen that yet.
Because so many people refused to see it because the Ang Lee Hulk was so terrible.
And that's Ang Lee. He was a good director. What's up?
He was not the right person to do that. It's like you wouldn't have Kurosawa do the Avengers, if he was alive. People would probably hate it.
He started on Tora.
Did he?
Yeah. And they had to fire him because he wasted so much money.
That is a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
Let's bring it back to the comics.
Okay.
So, since we kind of got on talking about Superman villains,
all right,
why don't we do a kind of a breakdown and kind of talk about some Silver Age supervillains?
Okay, the big 2, Lex Luthor and Brainiac.
Yeah, love those guys. And Brainiac stories are always really exciting.
Mm-hmm. And what a great tragedy, the city of Kandor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's shrunk, and Superman's always trying to fix it, and he can't.
Yeah. I love the stories where he would shrink down and go into Kandor, and he wouldn't have powers there. And he and I think either Jimmy Olsen or somebody that was there became Nightwing and Flamebird.
Right.
They were like a Batman and Robin in Kandor.
And they brought back the name Nightwing.
Yeah, that's when Robin graduated, kind of became an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Dick Grayson became Nightwing and has stayed Nightwing.
Yeah, that's a compared notes of Jimmy Olsen.
Yeah.
What else? That's the 2 big ones. Superman. I'm trying to think of.
I mean,
next has Petalek, it's
Yeah.
one of the most annoying villains, and Bizarro, who was not a
He was not
evil
a
villain, but he was just
he was a menace. I
a
mean, you had
super powered 3-year-old boy.
yeah, yeah. Well, there was Titano,
Ah, yeah.
the chimpanzee that went into space,
Mhm,
got huge, and oh, because it was exposed to kryptonite radiation or something,
mhm,
comes back King Kong sized and with kryptonite vision.
mhm.
Makes no sense, but hey, it works.
Right.
Um, I always liked Metallo. He was the guy. He had the robot body, but he looked like a person, and he
Mhm,
had the kryptonite core, so that he was super strong, and he could open up his chest, and like Superman would be weakened.
mhm.
I liked him. I liked he had the mustache, and there were several incarnations of the Kryptonite Man, someone who like
Mhm,
infused their blood with kryptonite, and so that they would be deadly to
mhm,
Superman,
mhm.
but to no one else.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the Lex Luthor, I think is my favorite. For simple, the one episode where he challenges Superman to this duel on a planet where they'll be equal,
Oh, that
and Lex
was
Luthor becomes a hero, and and I won't spoil it for you, but it's kind of sad, and you look at Lex Luthor a little bit differently afterwards. It's
oh,
kind of
I think that
fairly.
I think that's a classic. I'm trying to remember the name. I think the planet was Lexor, and they
Mhm,
renamed it. It was a planet that lost all its technology,
mhm,
like in wars or something. And he went and he kind of rebuilt their planet, and they renamed it in his honor. And it
mhm,
was the one place in the universe where Lex Luthor was a hero.
mhm,
And the people loved him and hated Superman just because he was the enemy of their,
mhm.
their savior. Um, I loved that. Luther
Yeah,
was married on that world and all these other things.
yeah. What a yeah.
You know,
It's a wonderful story. Now,
yeah. I think the best villains have that sympathetic
mm-hmm,
aspect, or they're not just purely evil. Doctor Doom from the Fantastic
mm-hmm,
Four is a prime example of a
yeah,
complex, a guy who has his own sense of nobility. Um,
yeah. Uh, I think Batman has the best villains.
I
Uh,
love the Flash's Rogues Gallery, and they do
mm,
not get talked about very much,
yeah,
but they were so bizarre. I mean, granted, everyone knows Batman's Rogues Gallery, and it's a madhouse,
mm-hmm.
literally. Just of crazy villains, and really many of them are really really exciting and interesting characters. And they a lot of them have this really tragic element to their story.
Mm-hmm,
The disfigurement, or something push them to crime, or things like
mm-hmm,
that. Um, but yeah, the Flash villains were so weird. They all had a strange gimmick, and they're all just kind of wild. I mean, you think there's was the Weather Wizard and Captain Boomerang and the
oh,
Mirror
yeah,
Master
mm-hmm.
and the Trickster and who were some other ones? Captain Cold.
Oh, yeah, they come to me now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have so much fun with all those guys. I mean, I really like Captain Boomerang.
Is he from Australia, apparently?
I think he was.
I think he's made some lists of the most ridiculous
He is ridiculous, but I just
villain.
really enjoyed him. He had all
Mm.
these trick boomerangs, uh, you know.
Well,
But I mean, then
why
some of the
not?
Flash villains were serious business. I mean,
Mhm.
Professor Zoom, the Reverse Flash, he was a guy from like the 30th century or something, and he came back and he was a murderer. Remember, he killed Iris Allen.
Okay.
Um,
No, that's
you not familiar with that story?
no, I am
Oh,
not.
oh, whoops.
Yep, that's
But
fine.
and then there was Gorilla Grodd also, who was the
Okay.
the super intelligent, mind controlling, ape.
I love ape stories.
Gosh, well, Gorilla Grodd is really an excellent villain. I mean,
Hmm.
like, because the Flash, most of his villains were kind of like they were petty criminals, and it
Hmm.
was almost kind of a game,
Hmm.
with how they would kind of have the back and forth with the Flash. But you had to have a couple of villains that really grounded it, in like, no, this is serious. And Grodd was serious. He wanted to conquer the world. He was a very formidable villain. So I liked him.
Hmm.
I liked him. So
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh. I think I need to go.
You need to go. Oh, yeah, you got to start your shift. Well, all right, this has been Comic Reflections. Thanks again for listening. Well,
Thank you for having me.
oh, anytime, Jeff. Bye.